Morning. I had a moment. Let me check my volume here. Make sure you guys can hear me just fine so we can have a nice little discussion. And I hope that you're doing well. I hope that, as I said, I wanted to share today some things that have been going on in my life for, uh, gosh, I don't know, at least a couple months. And some of the things that God has taught me through this path. So the devotion's about me, but I hope that you can learn from it. I hope you can learn um, something that is, I guess, that affects everybody. We all have that same situation, and that situation would be contentment. And my personal journey, as I discussed today, first of all, contentment with what I have is absolutely vital to my spiritual health. So if I'm not content, my spiritual health will suffer. In a world filled with constant desires and comparisons, not that I speak of respect or want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, there within to be content. I observe that contentment is not innate, but developed through a deliberative, you kind of got to deliberately learn on your own on this, much like mastering a skill. So contentment is just, it's kind of like having a Bible verse when you're in a situation where you can refer back to it. Well, same way with your mind and thinking with the term contentment. So in this devotion, I'm going to talk about three things that affected me and some aspects of cultivating contentment. And I want to support that by some scripture in the Bible to foster my own personal spiritual maturity. You know, we have to start with defining things. So let me define depravity. You've heard it said, Romans 3, 10, and 12, and in Ephesians talks about it. These are Paul or shawl, depending on which listener is listening. The biblical concept for depravity, I would say that it denotes a comprehensive corruption of what? The human nature due to the original sin. What's the original sin? Affecting every facet of an individual's being, an individual's mind, an individual's will, maybe some emotions, and I would certainly say in our actions. So rendering humanity spiritually dead is inherent. Why is it inherent? Because Adam was the first that's sinned. And it's an inclined to basically go against God or Yahshua, depending on who you're talking with, as evidence passes, as I said in Romans and Ephesians. This state certainly underscores the impossibility of innate righteousness or pursuit of God without divine grace. So you got to have divine grace, and emphasizing that while not every action is a maximum evil, I mean, it doesn't mean every sin is a maximum, oh my goodness, evil. But sin permeates in the human nature. It's human nature endeavors that necessitate a regeneration for salvation. Yahuwah, in salvation, Yahushua is for Jesus or for salvation. But anyways, why do I say that? I remember a story that was said to me, folks that had young children, and children will do bad, right? They're not taught that. They're not taught to be bad by you as a parent, right? But they do things sometimes that you don't understand. And you're like, well, where did he or she get that from? They had to pick it up from somewhere. And we think about that, and you have to understand we're born with that human nature of sin, and it's depravity. That's the definition. We're deprived and depraved because of the first sins of Adam. And that set the stage for us as before. So let's talk about 3 points today. Bear with me. This is about me. This is something I've learned probably in the last 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to talk about the contentment part, but it's a personal journey for me. So point number 1 is contentment is acquired through learning experience. You have to be a lifetime learner. I'm just going to say it. If you don't learn something new or try to learn something, you say, what's happening? I just don't know what to do. Well, maybe a puzzle, maybe a word cross or a crossword puzzle, or, maybe there's something you like to do, study on. Maybe you like outside gardening or whatever. Maybe do that. Maybe pick up something that's interesting you always wanted to know. Just challenge yourself a little bit and always be a lifetime learner. Philippians 4:11. Let's read that. I like my Bible. And as always, I forgot my glasses. Bear with this guy, this woman. Philippians, it said that Galatians, Ephesians, and Philippians. I heard it once said that it is God's power, electric power company, which goes into, I think, the Corinthians and Colossians. So that's kind of how you can remember Philippians company. So anyways, it's a memory thing. All right. So Philippians 4:11, let's read it together. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. That's powerful, brother, sisters. To be content. That's a lesson all by itself. Paul has learned in his being to be content. And it highlights this and emerges from instructions, from practice to and the life in trials, rather than arriving spontaneously. In other words, just as a child progresses, the simple tasks to complete abilities, such as advancing, playing chopsticks or piano, or performing Graham's lullaby, lesson for me, must actively learn to find satisfaction in the circumstances. So no matter what the circumstances, and I need to be positive, and I need to find contentment in it, and I need not try to want something that is not mine. So when we think about things, I think about for myself, okay? My example would be, includes when I navigate financial hardships by focusing on gratitude for daily provisions, or when I endure relational challenges by trusting God's sovereignty instead of harboring resentment. So my question for myself, and maybe you could follow along, in which specific situation in my life that I recognize a need for and to learn contentment through patience and endurance? Those are great questions for me this week in this practical point. I think of during financial constraints. I've always been a person, I don't really care about finances. I don't care about money. But the last 6 to 8 weeks, I've kind of gone through some things that I was expected as expenses, and they've outpaced my resource. I felt dissatisfied and worried over the unmet need. So this prompted me to cultivate a contentment through patience, endurance, gratitude for the basics, going back to the basics, trusting in divine provisions, and building a satisfaction in the times of scarcity. So for me, I seem to always get lately a lot of pressure about, you need more money for this, you got to have that, you got to have this, got to do it now, you got to do this, go get more money, go in debt, go do this, go do that. I think that's the wrong approach. I think that is clearly the wrong approach and what God doesn't want us to do. And I think I fell into that web this past 6 to 8 weeks. As disappointing as it is to me, I asked for God's mercy and putting me back into the place I was, which was in contentment. I fell out of it. My intent was to potentially earn income to help other people. And I completely ruled out God and his ability to provide. And I took control of that. So that's a learning for me this week. It's like I said, if we're lifetime learners, right? So point number 1, contentment is acquired through learning experiences. So I learned the last 6 to 8 weeks. I learned. Number 2, the point of godliness paired with contentment yields what? Gain. Let's go to 1 Timothy. We're just going to take a couple verses out of 1 Timothy right up front, and then we'll talk. But 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness, here's Paul again. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Contentment, great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we will carry nothing out of it. Doesn't matter how much you have. I think of the big oil tycoon, Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, one of the Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk guys of the early first century of, I would say the early 19th centuries. John D. Rockefeller was completely so rich, he didn't really need much of anything. Somebody asked him one day, they said, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? And John D. Rockefeller responded, so he's never content, is what he's saying. That's the moral there of the story, or the proof of the pudding. He wasn't content. He had to have one more dollar. Do you need one more dollar to that? What's your motive? You have to think about that. So I appreciate this verse immensely. Verse 8 says, and having food and raiment, let us with therein where we be content. So having food and clothes, just be content. That's what Paul's saying. He's pretty clear about it. It emphasizes that my spiritual devotion, combined with satisfaction in essentials, are surpassing material pursuits. If I'm thinking of not being content, if I'm not a content person, um, I'm not, my spiritual devotion shrinks because I'm pursuing the wrong thing. So when I think about, again, this is about me. Last 6 to 8 weeks involved when I prioritize prayer and Bible study over accumulating possessions, or when I choose to be simple in a lifestyle, such as opting for a modest house to allocate resources towards the charity of good giving. So as my morning prayer today was, I was thankful for God for the blessings he provided. Are you thankful? I ask myself that. Do I thank God enough? And I don't think I do. But remember, we're all depraved. Doesn't matter who you are. Don't put your faith in man, because they will let you down. I assure you. We're all capable of sin. Some in the maximum, some in the minimum. There's only one person that lived the sinless life. Anyways, how might I integrate that godliness with contentment to transform my daily priorities and decisions? I ask myself that. So to integrate this godliness with contentment, I need to take my schedule. I need to align it with the spiritual disciplines rather than the material pursuits. It seems like I'm getting a lot of pressure lately to give more money and go in more debt and this and this and that. A lot of promises. I'm pursuing the wrong thing. That's not who I am. And I'm depraved. When I'm tempted to prioritize helping people for additional income at expense of my family time, my devotion, and my time with God, and reading and studying the Lord, I limit my commitments. I limit those abilities when I focus on something else, as I have, trying to get some additional income for helping people. Now, I guess if you looked at the premise or the reason behind it, was to help more people. And that's it. And I feel like I've been taken advantage of. And I thank God. And I go back to my principles. I think about considering providential circumstances. What do I mean? Providential would be simply this: things that are difficult for us to make happen. Problem after problem after problem after problem after problem. Is God telling me something? Well, I had nothing but problems in the last 6 to 8 weeks in different aspects of doing things. I think God was telling me something. And so it took me a while to get there. So I'm there now. So my approach should cultivate godliness through the dedicated prayer, scripture study, and acts of service, thereby shifting my priorities from the wealth accumulation to nurturing faith and relationships. As a result, decisions became more deliberate, clarity, I would say. So aligned with eternal values and the free from the impulsiveness, driven by content, fostering a balance in spiritual enrichment of my spiritual life. Having more clarity, how do I integrate? That's what I have to do. I have to step back and have to look at what I've accomplished. And lately it's been horrible. And I don't feel settled. I feel amiss. I don't feel like God is behind the things that I've been doing, trying to generate, again, income for, these different missionaries and stuff. And I should rely more on him. And that's my point here. So number one, contentment is acquired through learning experience. So you got to learn. Number two, godliness paired with contentment yields a true gain. So I've got to be content. Number three, discontentment leads to spiritual peril. Let's go to 1 Timothy. Let's go to 1 Timothy, Old English, and let's continue reading 9 through 10. Paul says, but they that will be rich, catch that, fall into temptation and snare. The snare? Are you being tempted? I know I have been. And into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Are you being snared? Are you being tempted? Somebody putting a carrot out there for money? That leads to destruction as a man in perdition. Perdition is hell. So if I'm doing that, that's my life. The Bible's clear on what's going to happen. Verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, we preface, having money is not evil. But if you're like John D. Rockefeller, one more dollar, and you love money, that's not a good place to be, because that's the root of all evil. That starts evil. And I think about things over the last few weeks, and I'm thinking back, and I'm looking, and I'm seeking, and I'm trying to understand, and I think God has showed it to me, which while some coveted after, so coveted meaning wanting, gotta have it right now, pushing people into things and doing things. That's not what God, Yeshua would say, or God would say. They have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Boy, does that say, read again, Dean Alley. Read again, please. That's where I've been the last few weeks, and I don't like it. And I know God doesn't like it, and his word tells me that. I've erred from his godliness, and I pierced myself through with many sorrows. There's some things that I have done. I've got some sorrows. Now, folks, it's not a moral issue or anything like that. I was talking about from a financing standpoint. But we learn, and I've learned. Trust me, God has helped me. And that's in verse 10. So practically, it underscores the danger of basically we're coveting after something which erodes my faith and invites sorrow based on this verse. This verse. It's powerful. It includes times where I succumb to maybe an unethical business practice for financial gain. I'm saying that it can be viewed differently. It can be viewed differently, the things that I have been doing. Some would say the worst, some would say it's not. But the result is a broken relationship. And I think some of my relationship with my wife, who is very wise, was clear. She knew. When I become ensnared in the debt world through an impulsive purchase, that's driven by what? It can be envy. Mine was more of, what can I use the additional funds for? That's really what I want. I don't care about the money. But we have boundaries, and I'm glad my wife set one. So I asked myself, from personal temptations arising from the discontentment, am I discontented? Have I encountered? What are the arising discontentments that I've encountered? I just told you a bunch of them. And how can Scripture guide me to resist them? Well, let's just go to these two chapters. I combat envy of others' material successes by meditating on 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. I think when I think about it a little bit, I think about all these little carrots that are put out there, these little niceys, and it's not real. So that's how I have to focus on 1 Timothy 6:10, practicing gratitude and generosity to shift my focus from wanting something, covetousness, to more of an internal priority. This world's not our home. There'll be a new one. So I should resist so how do I do that? So you say, well, Chaplain, how do you do that? Well, you resist the patient relationships leading to the bitterness, 4:11, embracing patience and endurance through prayer and forgiveness in God's time. And so it's through God and through his prayer in Scripture will help me do a better job than what I've done in the last few weeks. So contentment is a learned discipline. It's essential for my spiritual well-being. As Paul has told us in 1 Timothy, he reinforces it actually by embracing learning through experience, pursuing godliness with satisfaction, and guarding against the sneers of discontentment. I could cultivate a resilience of faith that would honor God if I do that. I'm not honoring God when I'm not content. So in this society that we live, and I'm going to leave you to this, and but in our contemporary society dominated by social media comparisons, the consumer culture, we're consumers, right? We stopped manufacturing things a long time. We can go online, we consume things, and it comes to us rather quickly. I can apply contentment by maintaining a daily gratitude, maybe a journal, maybe writing something down to reflect God's provision, regardless of the circumstance. This practice counters the pressures to acquire more, fostering a spiritual health and enabling generosity towards others that are in need. Folks, this is Chaplain Dean Alley. I hope it was a blessing. I shared my openness with you. I shared you with my issues, and I hope that it helps you in some form or fashion. And if you need anything, I'm going to put a link on the bottom, and you can reach out that way. Through Faithia app is another one. I love you. Take care. God bless.